So for this last part of the drawing, we're going to finish it up with small details. I'm going to use the Micron 01. Again, you could use the same pen you've been using, but just try to press on it lightly. So as I vaguely explained before, I'm working with a 05, a 01, and a Sharpie. So the Sharpie is the big black areas. The 05 are a lot of the main lines that you're working with for the characters. And the 01 is a lot of the textured lines. So again, I go back and forth with the pencil and 01 when I'm working on what kind of textures I want to do. So I'm going to start off with the squid character. In my mind, I kind of know what texture I want to work with, but I'm going to go ahead and just draw out the shapes of where the texture is going to be. So I know that's what I'm going to fill in for this squid creature, right? So these are kind of like wrinkle areas I'm going to draw on, but I'm going to fill in all those little areas that I lightly drew with pencil with the texture itself. So the texture I'm using is I'm just going to kind of use a lot of little hatch marks, slightly rounded hatch marks, maybe little blemishes cut out throughout it. So I go up and down. I'm filling out this little blob shape I drew with the pencil, and I'm going to work on the hatch marks on this. So when you're doing texture on whatever you're drawing at home, whether it be like a tree, a building, a vehicle, whatever it is, kind of work out areas where you're going to know you're going to need to fill the texture with your pencil, and then go ahead and draw a straight pen with it afterwards. You don't have to draw your texture with your pencil, just kind of draw the areas where you're going to draw the texture itself. You don't want to waste time by working out all this kind of pencil texture that you have to repeat again with pen, when you could just draw the shape and know where you're going to work it. So now I drew out all the lines there, the hatch marks, and now I'm going to add like the little blemishes around it itself. So 01s are really fun to use. You could just keep adding such a small little minute line. You could do little details with it. So these are a little bit less of the hatch marks and kind of more into kind of wrinkle zone around the eyes. But I'm just building it up within the shapes I drew prior with the pencil. So now even down here on its suit, I'll just draw a kind of little stitch seam line. I drew that line in pencil, and now I'm just going over little kind of stitches so it kind of looks like a stitch suit itself. Maybe add little stuff in around the corners, all these buttons, just to kind of imitate the way fabric and cloth and strings and clothing works too. So now I know this is like the back of his neck that this tentacle's in front of, so I'm just going to fill that whole area with texture itself, kind of move up and then to around the eye with just kind of fun lines. I just go as I see fit. So again, I'm going to do the same kind of texture down these tentacle fingers. I'm going to fill this whole area in just straight lines up and down. This represents more of like a shadow overcasting it, and then the outside I'll do kind of like the tentacle texture itself. But this is like further back in space beyond the top of the tentacle and behind this rifle kind of laser gun barrel. So I'm just going back and forth. Maybe the tentacles on his finger a little bit more wider, a little bit less textured. So again, I just pick out little fun things to do. Maybe they have little kind of circles around these kind of shoulder pads I drew on this character. And that's the fun thing with the 01. When you have kind of made up architecture or style and fashion, you could just do any kind of little patterns, real tiny and real small, with an 01 pen. So maybe I'll add a full-on texture for this walkway in the background. This is just going to be simple hatch lines throughout the whole thing. So I'm taking it slow. When you do long lines, don't go right to left, back and forth. I usually go down, pick up my pen, go down, pick up my pen. So instead of going back and forth, you end up kind of losing the line and making little N's and M's and little squigglies that you don't want. So I knew this was kind of be glass, so now I did the big black part. So now I'm going to do a thin little O1 line around it. It's kind of weird, bubble glass. And now I could just kind of like, I know this is kind of weird metal, future metal, just squiggly lines throughout it. Or maybe in the corners kind of build up hatch marks. Just to show a little bit more depth. I know this is behind the tube, so it gets a little bit of shadow behind there, stuff like that. So a lot of these different areas, like even within this car, just do straight, quick hatch lines. So also within this car, I could keep bringing out the pencil, kind of doing the shine lines or whatever kind of manufactured lines they have throughout it. A lot of just horizontal lines cutting throughout it. So I just kind of quickly did few with pencil. Now I'm going back and forth with the O1. Maybe some squiggle lines, and maybe I could just back up and just kind of go back with a 5 and kind of outline those. Maybe there's a real thick one at the bottom. And then even under some of these kind of speed lines, I kind of darkened it up with adding another kind of heavy black spots too. So even when I'm doing little details, I could go really back and forth with the pencil and all sorts of pens. Maybe it's a little bit more heavy blacks within the hood of this kind of space car there itself. But going back to the one, maybe some quick little blemishes throughout the car, little stippling marks with little kind of dots. That's what stippling would be throughout these kind of lights I got there. So I can even go back onto the texture of this bird creature, maybe add a little tiny more feathers, just kind of hatch lines going out throughout its beak, maybe some lines around the eyes. Just whatever kind of little details you might want to add. So the one thing with the O1 is good for really far background stuff. So now I can kind of really play with the idea of kind of creatures and characters in the far background here. So I know this is another little spaceship. I'm drawing it real small. Oops, my head got in there for a second. But I'm real small, so your face gets real close to the paper there. I'll try to stay out of camera's view. But I, draw the little bit of kind of outlines and silhouette of the characters, and now I could just kind of do whatever kind of little tiny drawing I want of whatever kind of spaceship situation you want to go on. So that's a great thing with the O1 for all really far background stuff. You want to just do kind of simple silhouetted things, kind of simple shapes, but it builds it up when the reader sees it. It's like, oh wow, I could go further back in space. I see little kind of space cars going back there. And now I could even play around with the architecture in the background too as well. This is like the top of this kind of water bottle shaped building I originally imagined. That came down a bit. I don't want it to be too close to that, so I brought it down a little bit from where I initially penciled it, which is okay. You never have to follow your pencil's lines strictly at all. So I'm just going to go up and down the architecture with some of these folds as well. And then again, I have another little spaceship. I kind of have little characters back there. They're zipping through the sky. So whatever kind of fun stuff you can think of. Far background things, again, for more realistic stuff, would be birds or airplanes or helicopters or a lot of just variations of clouds, mountaintops, things like that. So I knew this was like the main kind of building that's taking up the background. I'm going to go back into it from the bottom here. It's still connected to this top tower. Again, this kind of idea of like a water bottle building. have that built up with the one. I know I'm going a little bit further behind it with this kind of dome building as well, but the dome gets kind of lost behind the building. I'm going to start building up with the layering of the buildings here now, right? So I have this one's in front of that one. This line covers that. And then this one obviously is the furthest one in the front. So there's another kind of building. I'm just sticking with the simple shapes to begin with, and then I'll go a little bit, maybe detailed a little bit more. And now I'm going to do a bit of a silhouette in the far background. So this is like way far in the distance, silhouette, and then even further in the distance, maybe it's kind of a space kind of tower, palace thing, way out there. So within these ones, I could just do solid textures. I'm going to do solid up and down lines. They don't even have to be that close to each other like it was for here for the shadow. This is just kind of a simple texture just to say, okay, that's way far in the background. It's, not easy to see. It's not any sort of focal point, but it's there. It's back there. We know this is a deep city, deep sci-fi city with a lot of tech. So maybe even further behind that. So now these lines, I'm going to have it build up a little bit darker. These aren't super close to each other, but this little tower in the background is even further back there. So I'm going to just really build up these lines and keep adding them closer and closer together to be a far background kind of sci-fi castle, palace way back there. So I worked out the main shape of this. Now I can kind of even go back again with my pencil, kind of build out areas where I know I'm going to just draw kind of like some fun space tech things. It's real simple. Just figure out where big kind of black areas are to begin with. And then I'm going to go ahead, leave some areas white in there. I'm just sticking with squares and rectangles. Keep it simple. For a lot of this made up stuff, it's fine. So I kind of laid it out thick there. I was like, okay, I know I could go back with my Sharpie to do all these heavy black areas for these kind of window or sides of buildings or whatever you want to exactly call them. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's science fiction. If you do that kind of thing, like I said before, not a lot of rules. It's just kind of fun, easy stuff. Even when you're working with regular architecture now, it's really simple to just kind of do a lot of just squares and grid work within a building, and it still reads as realistically, but especially when you're doing cartoon work. Stuff in the background is not as detailed. It doesn't really matter quite as much, but with the O1, you could add little fun details. I could add little circles in there. And maybe I know down in this area, this is just going to be solid black. So you always want to have a healthy amount of solid black imagery within your drawn picture. We don't want to have a lot of like very clear light picture. We want to have shadows and contrasted areas within it, right? So even bringing that, we know this is going to be the solid black line on this side. So back further in here, I could even add some more kind of random kind of text stuff, just different lines, jagged lines. And then I'll go into it with different layers of pens and maybe even go into it. Okay, maybe this is like little squares in there. Maybe these are windows for farther than back. It doesn't super matter. We know this is in front of it, this solid black area right here. So again, I can go further back again. Here we know there's another spaceship going on here. It's going to be bigger than these little ones way back in the distance, but not as big as this character who's in front of it, or this one down here. So we're really kind of going back in space with the moving of the eye throughout the composition. So maybe this is just kind of one kind of robot driver in the back of this car back here, flying around. He's kind of, again, like this one in the front. It's kind of like just a space convertible situation. Again, with sci-fi, it's fun to do things that just stuff's kind of floating around. If you do realistic stuff, it would be like stuff going in the sky. Another fun thing to do would be like underwater scenes. You have just the different layers of depth of actual fish and kind of aquatic beings and things floating around in the water. So again, I drew really super simple shapes. I'm not going to necessarily do full heavy blacks in there, but I will add a bit of cross hatching throughout it, kind of squiggle lines going throughout it too. And now I can kind of pick and choose what I want to do. Like I know I got to finish up this big water bottle area, but I also in the far background is fun to mess around there as well. So I know I could go and do a bit more kind of spacey stuff. So let's say, okay, I know this is the far extreme background. I could just start drawing some planets back there. Maybe I'll do heavy areas of kind of crackle black areas. So I could kind of draw that with a Sharpie. Quickly do it in. I could go in further and further detail with the Sharpie. And then also in the far background, you could add in just general kind of just weird spacey stuff. So it's kind of like a spaceport, right? So I drew kind of like a circle. Maybe it's kind of like a satellite type thing floating around in space. It doesn't really matter. So that's the joy of doing sci-fi work. So again, I would go even further into it, bring out my pencil again when I kind of want to work out what exactly is going on with this, what I've been calling water bottle building in the background here. Maybe kind of fun windows like that. And again, I could kind of block off parts that are going to be black. I know this is going to be black all down here, but maybe this strip itself is going to be black. There'll be white, a little sliver of white down there. Put some ovals up and down the side. So now that I kind of set the scene as to what kind of drawing I want to, details I want to add for the buildings, I could go ahead and do fun things like, okay, I know this is the oval buildings, or this could get a squiggle line, and this is where it's going to be heavy black, and just really have fun with it, right? So I'm not necessarily going to finish this drawing right now. This is the end of my part of the lesson. And you guys, when you're working on your own drawing, you can take it as far as you can. I really recommend you adding lots of little texture and details to everything. Always look up reference and fun things for things like animal texture, stuff in the background, building architecture, fashion of what people wear, things like that. So this lesson, we really learned how to break images down in the foreground, middle ground, background, and break it down into like a zigzag shape. And we like to have a lot of overlapping elements within characters or buildings and vehicles going on top of each other to help emphasize the shape and the depth of the image itself. So that's it for this week, and then we'll move on to the next smaller panels lesson for the next one.